All right. I believe this is the grand finale. Composition. Let's bring it all together. Finally, kind of how all of these things come together along with symmetry, um, scale, proportion. Let's dive into our examples. Let's come back to the School of Athens again. We looked at the complementary colors and the focal point. Let's look at sort of that muted color of the architecture along with the geometric lines of the architecture versus those brightly colored organic shaped figures throughout. Line, you've got descriptive lines that create realistic shapes and delineations throughout. Shapes, you've got the figures themselves that sort of create these lines. You've got this figure here on the steps that kind of draws your eye and almost connects, like, hands across the world to get you into these other groups as they connect to the main party up here on the steps. The void spaces add balance. You've got this architectural void space that takes up more than half. We like places for our eyes to rest on something clean. So we like balance. So this guy here, Diogenes, he links that central group to the lower right group. Without him, there'd almost be too much void space, and this sort of narrative story of what's happening here at the School of Athens wouldn't sort of include this group here. They'd feel a bit out of place. But Diogenes just hanging out, reading some stuff in the middle of everything, kind of physically acts to break up the void space that would have been these marble steps. Directional line. The architecture is sort of a secondary frame here. You've got the main figures that create this primary line, though they're actually sort of behind the other figures. But these foreground figures are not the focal point. He does that with color and shadow here a bit, but he creates symmetry. We've got the focal point in the center, and we've got essentially an equal balance of mass on both sides of the center. All right, so that balance of left-right symmetry. Cimabue, the Madonna enthroned. This is 1280, a little bit earlier than most of what we've been looking at. Symmetry. When you've got a symmetrical piece, the focal point is always in the middle. You can fold the paper in half, and on that fold crease is your focal point. That's the point of symmetry, is that it's balanced on either end and you got your focal point in the middle. Vertical symmetry is honestly most common, where you've got that, you fold the paper in half and the line comes down the middle vertically. Madonna is seated slightly off center here, but the angels are identical, symmetrical, boom, 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 boom. And Madonna's head is still in the absolute center of that apex. Symmetry is stable, iconic, static. Most religious compositions are symmetrical. I mean, literally, we use the word icon. It's iconic. This is literally an icon, a religious icon for worship, but stable. These tenets of religious faith are always going to be there. They're not in motion. They're not off balance. They are here forever. Versus asymmetry that kind of gives you movement, dynamic. It's more casual. Casual is not what we want from our icons, right? We want stableness and foreverness. If you ever look at a sort of podium meeting of the president, like an official one, it's going to be vertically symmetrical. The podium's in the middle, and then you've got flag, left, right. It will, down the line, stay vertically symmetrically balanced because we're creating this visual imagery of stability and iconic stability. Asymmetrical, let's talk about Turner's Snowstorm, 1812. So this is asymmetrical. This is a very off symmetry painting. It's dynamic, there's movement, there's chaos, it's intense. With an asymmetrical painting or composition, the balance is not automatic. Like you get balance with symmetry because like it's same left, right, like the two scales balance. With this, balance is not automatic, and an asymmetrical composition can be off balance. Turner balances this with the use of balancing values. So we talked before about the most intense blue is a low value blue. That dark, rich blue is very intense. The best thing to sort of pair with that is high value yellows are bright and opposite, but equally intense. If you look at the color wheel, again, you've got opposites, but these two are sort of a magic set of opposites in their intensity versus saturation model as well. So you've got the dark blue intensity of the shadow of the storm, and then you've got the light, bright intensity of the sun sort of cutting through here. So he's balancing this use of space with dark and light, balancing values. Focal point can be anywhere in asymmetry. You've got to be able to look at the piece to figure out what is happening. With this piece, I think your eye is drawn to this big sort of wave scoop, and it kind of hits the apex up here where it's nearly blotting out the sun, and then it comes down and trickles for your secondary focal point after you've kind of moved your way through visually this shape. You've got the people. You almost sort of don't notice that there's people initially in this piece. It's all about the weather, the primordial forces. But then you see these people trying to survive the situation. So that's where you're getting a story involved. That'd be the secondary focal point. All right. Poussin's Death of Germanicus, 1627. Open versus closed composition. Again, we talked about sometimes if you're looking over somebody's shoulder, you've got that shared perspective, and that can be an invitation to engage. Other times when it feels like you're literally getting elbowed or shouldered out of the composition, it can close you off or disengage you. So, focal point. Almost dead guy in the white shirt, right? Everybody's paying attention to him. He's quite bright right here. I'm paying attention to him too. POV, your point of view. You're feeling closed out, pushed aside. This is happening without you. To think that it's theatrical almost, except for people have like turned their back on you. They're pushing you out. Like you are not part of this party. You are watching what's happening, helpless, passive, not part of the action. All the figures are facing the focal point. It is closed. They are busy. They don't have time for you. This is a closed composition. You can see even right down to like the last of her little dress here. It's in frame. There is no action happening off frame here. We are seeing everything that's happening, and it's all closed, turned in on this one focal point, and we're really not a part of it. So this is a closed composition. An open composition, I think Monk by the Sea by Friedrich in 1809 is possibly the most open composition of any composition ever. I think, without this one has a lot more like contemplative angst, but think of those like screensavers of like a palm tree where you're looking at like a little bit of beach and then nothing but ocean that cuts across your screen. It's open, right? It's an open composition where you just assume that that like blue sea water and that sandy beach just go on forever on either side, spilling off your screen, right? That's why it feels tranquil. It's why it feels immersive. Because you're just like surrounded by endless beach and sea. So's the monk here. Nothing keeps you in the frame, right? There's no like tree to cut you off or something. There's nothing to frame this. It's just endless sea and coast. Honestly, this one's very contemplative. I'm a little bit worried about that monk out there. I think he's a little sad and maybe could use somebody to talk to. But that's just what I get out of this piece. But that's an open composition. There's nothing sort of keeping you in frame. Everything like the action or tranquility or whatever seems to spill out and go on forever off canvas. All right, a little piece about composition here. You've got a triptych. Tri as in 1, 2, 3 panels. So you got a 3-panel piece here is a triptych. FYI, 2 panels is a diptych, diptych. And more panels, rather than getting into like more shape names, we just go with polyptych. So poly, as in P-O-L-Y, many, tick. Polyptych just means many panels. So scale. You know what sort of naturalistic scale looks like, where all things look like they do. Like people get smaller the further away they are, right? That's kind of that vanishing point perspective scale. Here we've got something called a hierarchical scale. Do you see how people are weirdly artificially bigger and smaller than each other based on how important they are, not how far away they are? So who's big? This is quite interesting. You've got the holy humans. You got Mary and Joseph and the shepherds, and the saints that we're talking about. And then the angels are like these weird little Oompa Loompa midgets. They are sort of a secondary group. And then you've got the patrons, the actual living people who paid for this painting. This guy and his family. There's his sons, there's his wife, there's his daughter. They're also Oompa Loompa midgets in here, but they're even bigger than the bloody angels, which is a statement to unpack, man. So the saints are big. The patrons who paid for them are small. The painting, paid for the painting, not paid for the saints. But they're still written into the story of Christ's birth. So that's pretty, you may be like a tiny person in the painting, but you still like put yourself at the birth of Christ. That's not a humble thing to do. Anyway, so that is a hierarchical proportion scale. And it, again, tells you part of the story by looking at the weird, like, why are some people tiny and why are some people big? It's kind of giving you their importance pecking order. All right, so let's look at some naked statues. All right, proportion. Classical perfect human figure. Proportion. You get 7 heads high is usually considered perfect body proportion. So no matter how big the total statue is, the head is one portion, and then you've got 7 heads total down to the toe. So the body is 6 of the heads, and head means chin as you're looking at it to top of head. So I challenge you to do this for yourself. Sometimes it's a little tricky if you don't have like somebody else at home, but I'm pretty good at like maneuvering a ruler from the bottom of my chin, like sort of sideways on my neck to hit the wall behind me. How tall are you from like top of your head to bottom of your chin as you're sort of facing forward? So how much space that takes up. I am waving my hands around, but you can't see me. Let's cancel that for a minute. So rather than kind of doing this, do what it actually looks like to look at you. So top of your head to the bottom of your chin is sort of one unit. And then, so measure that in inches, and then measure your whole height in inches, and then divide total height. So, let's think here. So I'm going to grab out a calculator. I'm pretty sure that I am 67 inches tall. And my head, from the top of it to the bottom of my chin, if I'm just like staring straight ahead, semi-normal, is about 9.5 inches. So if I do 67 inches divided by 9.5, I get 7.05. So I'm a little more than 7 heads tall, which puts me in proportion according to the classics. Let's get back to it. So 7 was the original Greek look. Sometimes the body got distorted to an extra half. I think if you'll notice here, head number 3 comes to like right below the belly button here on the hip bone. Head number 3 comes right below the belly button on the hip bone here. So that whole extra half a head is legginess on this sort of later Renaissance idea of the perfect body. I find it interesting because I've been having my students do this for many years, so I've got quite the data set. It seems like really tall dudes usually end up on that like 7.5, sometimes closer to 8 heads height, and most of the time it's leg. So it's interesting to know that like 7 heads high, most of us fall within about a half of a head in that zone. So it's not some sort of unattainable ideal, but it's rather what you're very much accustomed to looking at for the proportions of a human body. So, what happens when an artist distorts that? All right, let's look at Parmigiano's Madonna Longneck is the nickname of this baby. 1534. We've got extreme figure distortion here. Look at Madonna's hand. I don't know if you just want to like casually hold up your hand to the side of your face and see that your hand is not as long as your face. Whereas that hand would like spider wrap around that woman's face like 1.5 times. That's a huge, scary hand. She's got itty bitty little shoulders, this long raking neck, and like she's basically a triangle. Like look at those legs, creating that very stable triangular base. As you can see, this was done a few decades after Michelangelo's Pietà that we looked at the beginning of these lectures. And she also creates a very stable base, but it's with her clothing, not any distortion of her perfect proportions. Look at the angel's leg here, standing there with the libations. It's like her leg is way over half of her body. And Jesus, that is not a baby's body. That is a very elongated, stretched out body there. So what we've got going on here is a story as you're supposed to be paying attention to these distortions. Parmigiano like grew up and was trained during the High Italian Renaissance. He saw Michelangelo's Pietà plenty. He is part of that like renegade punk group that rejected the Renaissance. It's called the Mannerism movement. So he's subverting and messing with these classical proportion of perfection expectation. So he's creating a focal point and directionality by having you paying attention to these very attention drawing distortions of the human figure. He's telling a story here. I think honestly, this is his foreshadow of the Pietà. Like the Virgin Mary here is holding her baby, welcoming him into the world as the angels are attending her. And a very short 3 decades later, she's going to be holding her son's dead corpse over her lap in this exact same position. So it's a foreshadow to the sort of personal tragedy to come. Also notice this like little dude in the background for no reason. He's not far away. He's just tiny. And of course, we've got this nod to classical architecture back here, but it's unfinished. It's like a weird prop scene. We've got curtains flowing in the background, kind of a nod to Raphael's Madonna that we saw at the very beginning. But he's, of course, distorting and making kind of a commentary and rejecting these things while at the same time nodding at them. So you can see that, like, getting weird with proportions and perspective and all these things that we've eventually established how to do them, quote, perfectly. Part of the artistic expression is to sometimes mess with perfect to make a point, which is totally what the punk movement of the Renaissance mannerism was. 500 years ago, they were the punks, man. If they knew how to do mohawks, they'd have done it. All right, perspective. Quick note on creating depth of making a 2D canvas look three-dimensional. Vanishing point perspective is what you studied in geometry class, with like all the lines converging on that like one vanishing point in the horizon. So like if you were to draw a building, like a building that was this far away would have to fit in this zone, whereas a building that was supposed to be on the same street would have to be this big if it was in this part of the painting. Remember, like the train track that goes to nowhere? Choo-choo. That's vanishing point perspective. Train tracks look like they get closer and closer together until they go off into the distance, right? Da Vinci's Last Supper. Here the perspective lines are drawn on for you. You can see the architecture matches them exactly as he painted them because this is the High Renaissance and everything's perfect. So the perspective lines are drawn on here for you to show you the vanishing point is hidden right behind Jesus's head. There's 2 reasons for this. It's to give a sense of 3-dimensional depth to the painting, and it also draws your eye very neatly towards the focal point that is Jesus's face, the portrait. So this is that vanishing point perspective when things get smaller, when they are farther away. Another kind of perspective is atmospheric perspective. So this is literally that there is more air, more atmosphere of like molecules and water vapor and dust particles between you and the thing you're looking at the further away it is. So they tend to get fuzzier, the tones get more muted the further you get away. Think of pretty much Googling any like mountain scene at sunset where they love to show all that like mist settling. And so this piece here, it's not as vividly drawn. The colors are more muted. It's fuzzier. It's faded. That's atmospheric perspective. Here you can see the colors get more muted. They get fuzzier. It literally looks there's a mist between us and those guys in the background. That's atmospheric perspective, trying to show you that atmosphere in between. Right. That was a lot. So giving you this idea, let's wrap it up. Impressions, indoor, outdoor, size, frame, height, stacked, alone, context. Then you actually get to the painting or the sculpture or the piece. Genre, materials, technique. What is it? What is it made of? How did they make it? Point of view. First start with theater or engaged. Why? Bird's eye view, worm's eye view, somebody breaking the fourth wall and staring at you. How can you tell? How are you making this choice? Focal point. Where is your eye drawn to first? Second. Color value, saturation, how complementary or analogous color schemes are happening. Like, what's our color scheme going on? Is it warm? Is it cool? Is it complementary? What kind of complementary? Line quality. Is it descriptive, expressional? Is there a directionality to the overall composition? Shapes. Do we get geometric? Do we get organic? Is there a mix? Is there any sort of void space ground relationship of what's throwing shapes? Composition. Does it seem open or closed? What does that mean to the reading? Symmetry. Is it symmetrical? Is it linear symmetrical? Is it asymmetrical? What does that imply? Scale. Is it natural? Is there a vanishing point perspective to it? Or is there some sort of weird hierarchical distortion thing going on? If you've gotten these concepts down, you are ready to critique any work of art like a pro. You're ready to talk about anything from any era ever. For the rest of the semester, we're going to use this stuff and dive into what these choices mean to be, I guess, better understanding a culture, the art that they produce, what they're expressing, what they're trying to say, how that reflects on the other historical and literary things that we can put in context with the time period that we're looking at. So thank you for hanging in there. I'm losing my voice because I did this all in one shot. You're welcome that you get them in 6 parts. And yes, please refer back to any of these that you need to in brief chunks. And I look forward to diving into the rest of the class.